Scooterheads, welcome to the home of electric scooting, the Electric Scooter Podcast. This is going to be a good episode. Well, we're going to do first kind of a state of the podcast. I'm over 50 podcasts now. I considered going back and pulling out some highlights, maybe a couple quotes from Chuck Temple, Ginger on Wheels, Paul Somerville, Timothy West. I don't know. There's so much to choose from. Scott in Tampa talking about the tires on the Segway 9-Bot Max. There's a lot of things I could pull from, but in the end, I'm just way too lazy. It's okay for me to talk about the podcast now because this is the state of the podcast, but we're going to have some news a little bit later, too. Now, we're not a YouTube channel, so you don't see immediately on the screen how many likes, how many subscribers, that kind of stuff. But if you do listen on iTunes and you scroll all the way, for example, you're listening on your phone. Actually, it's not even iTunes anymore. It's just called podcast. It's a little purple round icon with a microphone in it and some lines looking like it's emanating sound. Scroll all the way up. Just keep going up. And at the very bottom, you'll see a place to rate the podcast. And if you like this podcast, give it 5 stars. We have had 26 ratings so far. And I think all of them except one were 5 stars. I'll go ahead and read a couple of the comments I've got. I was starting to say, if you'd like to give me feedback, obviously I'm dagwoodstreets@gmail.com. But if you want to give me 5 stars, you can go ahead and write comments in there as well, good or bad. Again, I don't make any money, not monetized, doing this as a hobby. Anything you say to me is just going to help me improve the podcast. That is, if I decide to listen to you, which is not guaranteed. For example, here's one that says, I love the podcast, but Dagwood got mad that a government agency bailed on the interview. Yeah, I got frustrated. Yeah, sure. He discussed proposed questions that he was going to ask. Yeah, they did ask me to prepare questions. The questions would have embarrassed the agency for not having more regulations for electric scooter riders. That part I'm a little bit of disagreement on because really what I was getting at is wanting to know Joe Biden's infrastructure plans. And I wanted to know what they know. I'm not saying, hey, you need more regulations. Give us more regulations. Maybe I'll play it later, but I heard that from the UK. Somebody complained, we need more regulations. And I have been vocal in the past that I support the state of Hawaii's approach, which is no regulations. They just don't address it. Hey, if you run into someone and hurt them, then you address that. If the speed limit's 25 for cars, maybe you ought to be going 25. You want to wear a helmet? Wear a helmet. You don't want to wear a helmet and you're not worried about your melon? Go for it. So I do support no regulations. Let me be clear and on the record, I want 0 regulations, not some regulations, not a waffling kind of opinion. I want no regulation on electric scooters and most PEVs. What I really advocate is infrastructure, getting from place to place, especially in urban areas, with something of a road that is more than just paint on the street and you're in there mixing it up with 18-wheelers and buses. Talking about arching bridges that cut through traffic across town. He says, he or she says, well, it's Florida Scooter Man, so it's a he. Keep your head down, bro. If you keep bringing attention to us, they will regulate more. He may be very correct on that one. Your questions were like, any power limits in the future? You know, people at government agencies, they don't need me to mention it to them. It's not like You hear the word beer, so you got to run out and buy beer. I'm not saying you should have speed limits. I just want to know what they're working on. And in fact, maybe if we know that they are planning on something, we could fight it before it actually ever happens. But it's a valid point. I'm not dissing Florida Scooter Man. Definitely not. I see your point. Writing regulations, etc. Shut the heck up. Don't raise issues like that publicly. 3 exclamation points. I get it, Florida Man. I get it. I get you, bro. I got it. You're right. So true. Let's see. What else do we have here as far as reviews? Finally, a podcast about electric scooters. I've been searching for a podcast about electric scooters for quite a while. And have not been able to find what I look for in a podcast. There are lots of great YouTube channels, but I love podcasts. And this one is great. Well, thank you. That's pretty cool. That's why I made this podcast. I talked about the Mosfera made in Latvia ATV scooter, and one of their slogans was, I don't know if it's word for word, but it was something like, we created it because it didn't exist. And that's exactly the case with this podcast. Nice overview of electric scooters. Good job, guys. Yeah, suffice it to say, it would be nice. Again, I don't get any money, not a big deal. But it's just nice if you go ahead and give me 5 stars, and after the 5 stars, say whatever you want. You want to criticize me or whatever? That's awesome. I do some dumb stuff. I'm a little wacky, a little bit goofball sometimes. So next, as far as the State of the Scooter podcast, there is a company called Podcharts, and they track podcasts all over the world. There are over 8 million podcasts in the world, and they are broken up into 7 categories. And there's a weird thing to where hobbies in some country and leisure in some countries, and in some countries I think they have both a hobbies and a leisure category. And that's got to be, come on, podcasts? That's got to be the largest of the 7 categories, right? I don't know what the other ones are. Technology, business, automobiles. I don't know what they are. So I think that kind of explains why we're both number 36 and number 37 in Greece under hobbies, which I think is pretty fantastic. It's actually hard for me to fathom. It's hard for me to believe that that could be true, that there's so many podcasts out there, and the lowly, diminutive electric scooter podcast would go all the way up to, and if it's 36 and 37 because of hobbies and leisure, split that, it seems to me it would be ranked even higher, because the same thing is actually true in the Netherlands. We're 75 and 85. Australia, we are number 222. That's the state of the podcast. As your host, Dagwood Streets, I'm very pleased at those numbers. Doesn't pat my wallet any, but I don't care. So that ends the segment called The State of the Podcast. Next, let's get into the news a little bit.
No more scooter rides in the cemetery. Just those spider webs and memories. No more scooter rides in the cemetery. Just those spider webs and memories. Hey!
No more scooter rides in the cemetery, man. That's from 1985, Christian Boy. I was trying to find songs about scooters, and there's not many. No more scooter rides in the cemetery for you, scooter heads. We've been talking about Jewel in the Sea, England, the United Kingdom. and their really strange laws regarding scooters. And we go back and forth hearing different things from different people, but I found the most concise explanation of scooter laws in the UK and why they are what they are. So let's give a listen real quick to this and see if you agree with me. This is from the YouTube channel The Verge, VERGE.
So I've always been a cyclist who hated electric scooters until I went to Berlin. So I was sold on the idea of getting an electric scooter, but when I got back to London, I hit a little bit of a snag. It turns out scooters are essentially illegal to use here because of a series of laws that date back to the Victorian era. The oldest one is the Highways Act 1835, which bans horse, ass, sheep, mule, swine, cattle, or carriage from being on the pavement or sidewalk.
Pay attention to the use of the word carriage because we'll see that again coming up as they define what a carriage is.
But there's a more modern law which updates this old law and is the final nail in the coffin, which says that carriages include any mechanically propelled vehicle. In other words, don't ride your scooter on the pavement, you weirdo. But the real problem is the laws that collectively prevent electric scooters from being used on the road. Now, in the eyes of the law, electric scooters just kind of don't exist. And so somehow they fall into the same category as motor vehicles, yet they've got no chance of meeting the same kind of safety and tax regulations. Oh, and don't even think about riding in the bike lane. Those are reserved for things with pedals. So scooters are out. Oh, electric bikes are cool. You guys can stay.
So bicycles and e-bikes are not in the same category as electric scooters in England.
There are a lot of scooters on London streets, but technically, every single one of these riders is risking a £300 fine and 6 points on their license.
£300, British pounds, sterling, is 354 euros, 554 Australian dollars, or 508 Canadian dollars.
And if you live here in New York City, you've probably noticed the same thing. Electric scooters are everywhere, but there are no shared scooters like Bird and Lime.
I did not know that. In New York City, it's all privately owned scooters. I'll bet if you looked at statistics, I'll bet they have less accidents, less issues with electric scooters because, according to this guy, they don't have shared scooters or rental scooters.
And that's because they're technically illegal here, too. Now, the enforcement is not quite as harsh as it is in London, and the cops basically turn a blind eye. But e-scooters are on the list of banned vehicles with the DMV. So scoot at your own peril, New York.
According to this report, it sounds like he's saying that technically electric scooters are illegal in New York, but people just do it anyway. And there are no rental scooters like Bird and Lime.
There is a loophole, and that's that e-scooters can be ridden on private land in the UK. For the past year, Bird has been running an electric scooter trial in the Olympic Park in London. The company's hoping that the more people it can get onto scooters, the more people might have the same kind of revelation that I had in Berlin. Bird is just one example of an electric scooter sharing company, but there are plenty more that will want to move in as soon as the city legalizes scooters, and we all know what that can look like. I think it's fair to say a few cities were maybe too hasty in opening their doors to e-scooter companies.
Now take Austin, Texas, for example. That city is overrun with electric scooters. Now there's a recent study from the CDC that found that 20 people were being injured per 100,000 e-scooter trips over a 3-month period. That's a pretty alarming rate. Part of the problem is the scooter sharing companies are moving faster than the city regulators can keep up. So you've got cities like San Francisco, Madrid, Indianapolis, and Antwerp that have been forced to write regulations after the scooter companies have already come in and dumped dozens and dozens of scooters on their streets. But here in New York State, they're trying to avoid that problem by letting each city write its own rules governing scooter sharing services.
Okay, now the report is turned back to the United States, and I should point out that that is posted on The Verge, but it is a BBC report. It's the electric. Scooter Podcast. From Las Vegas, where it's hot. The Electric Scooter Podcast. Okay, so the Scooter Dome in Las Vegas is not hot today. It is 75 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 24 degrees Celsius. To be honest, I just like saying the word hot. And I just wanted to work it into a little Electric Scooter Podcast spot. So let's get back to the UK. I came across an interesting YouTube video where this gentleman is scooting in a park in London, and he has his camera running surreptitiously, I believe, because the footage is not very good. But what's important is he caught the audio, and it's a beautiful day in London, and he's scooting through the park, and a couple police officers, one male and one female, stop him and talk to him. And he kind of asks a couple questions, and he gets the impression, he makes comments later on in the YouTube comments, that it seemed like they let him go because it was a nice day. Technically, they could have actually confiscated his scooter. That's the penalty in England. They take your scooter. This conversation's interesting. If you're not from England, I hope you can understand the accent. I think I understand most of it. This is from April 30th, 2021. The YouTube channel is Misled Ragdolls, Ragdollz. It's called E-Scooter Law Explained by Police. The first thing you're going to hear is the male police officer talking, saying that he thinks they're underutilized. And when he says it, he means the laws. He hopes the laws will change. And then you'll hear the female officer chiming in, saying that people need them to get around. When you hear the person mention, well, they can't collect taxes on it, that is the scooterhead.
I think it will change, but because it's...
I hope so, because I think they're being underutilised.
Well, at the moment,
they're an ideal way to get to and from work and to get around places. So
I couldn't do without it, and you're right.
They're eco-friendly, so
I think it will change very, very soon, but just at the moment, just so you're aware, just
Because it's hard to tax them, isn't it?
That's it. You can't tax them, can't insure them.
they technically come under the definition of a mechanically propelled vehicle. So
Yeah,
technically they should have a driving licence, insurance.
MOT,
I
tax,
know.
the lot.
It's aggro, isn't it?
Yeah,
All the stuff there.
and like I said, we're both under the impression that the law is going to change imminently. You look at places like Canterbury and
That are
Northamptonshire,
doing their trials.
so
Am I allowed to just drive it around here, though?
No.
The scooterhead asked, am I allowed to ride it around here? And the male police officer says, don't. No. But then you hear the female officer saying, well, just be careful.
Like, just...
Just be very, very careful.
just get,
Oh, there you
please
go.
don't knock anyone off.
I think every time I approach a corner, I do ding my bell.
And do you know what we both said as you rode past? He's actually riding very considerably, but someone in a bad mood
Yes.
in this uniform will have it off you. I'm just trying to give you a fair
really?
warning.
Again, I apologize for the poor audio. Remember that this scooterhead is recording surreptitiously or not in an obvious manner. He's probably got a GoPro hanging off of his shoulder bag or something like that, so the audio's not that clear. But what's interesting is the male officer says, I'm in a good mood. Later on, he'll comment about what a nice day it is. He says, some other police officer is likely to not be as nice as me.
We're in very good moods because it's nice and sunny.
Nice sunny day, you're outside, isn't it?
Yeah.
You got the fresh air, that's
I'm
it.
literally very, very happy, but I'm very, very worried now if I'm riding it around now.
Just to give you the heads up. But yeah, so I think it will change soon, but just be careful and don't ride like a crap.
I hope you're able to make out what they were saying. I did try using a little compression and low bandpass filters and things like that to make it a little more clear. And again, I understand not all of our listeners are from England, although a good amount are. I didn't mention earlier in the state of the podcast that we were in the United States ranked 2,226, but that's way back in March. I think it's a lot higher now, but I still think that is a good number. I don't remember what the UK number was, but the email I received from the statistics company said that we will send you an email or some type of alert when you break into any country worldwide's top 100 rankings. Hey, it could happen, right? Anything's possible. Electric podcast scooter news. Dagwood here to bring to you. Electric podcast scooter news. Dagwood here to bring to you. The last thing I want to talk about is really something that I'd like to promote as a motorcyclist, skateboarder, surfer, and someone who's interested in automobiles. I rely on forums a lot. If something is wrong with my van or my truck, I go straight to forums. I'll type in the name of the vehicle, the word forum. I do belong to a couple forums to where I'm actually signed in and make comments. This PEV revolution is happening. It is happening now. It's picking up steam, but we still have a long, long way to go. We all know it makes more sense to pop on something that you just plugged into the wall to charge and cruise and have fun on your way to work or school and not have a problem parking and be in a good mood when you get there. And hopefully the people around you, if they came in on scooters or PEVs, they weren't sitting in choking, smoking, nut-to-butt traffic to get to work. So they're going to be in a better mood too. You've heard me say it a bunch of times, and you live it, so you know how that works. But since the revolution is just getting started, where are you going to find forums for vehicles coming mostly from China that are not built in your country? In some cases, they might be slightly assembled, hopefully, in your country. So things get lost in translation, and even in China, when they put together a scooter, the parts are coming from multiple factories, and a lot of times those parts weren't made specifically for that scooter, but they're kind of making it work. I won't get off too much into tires, although I do plan to do a tire episode coming up pretty soon, but tires are a really critical part of that. There was a guy on YouTube talking about he bought a scooter 5 years ago. He got a flat tire, and he's never ridden the scooter again because he couldn't figure out how to fix it. He has other scooters, and he's been riding those whole 5 years, and he changes the tires and patches the tubes and swaps them out. I think on one scooter he even went from solid tire to pneumatic. So it's not a guy unfamiliar with scooters, but he's got that one scooter that's dead in the water because he can't figure out what to do with it. Well, forums are your best friend. And if anybody knows of a forum other than the Electric Scooter Guide, please let me know. Until then, I am trying to be more active on the Electric Scooter Guide forum. It's forum.electric-scooter.guide. And I started off my initial foray into scooter forum by asking something that's been on my mind, and you've heard me mention it on the podcast before. Which hydraulic brakes are preferable? Nut or Zoom, N-U-T-T, because that's what you see on most scooters that have hydraulic brakes. And again, we could discuss brakes again. I don't want to go too far into a sidebar. We're coming up to the end of the podcast. But basically, for scooters they go up to 20, 25 miles an hour. I think cable actuated is okay. They're a little more maintenance. Hydraulic is certainly preferable in all circumstances. If you're going to pay an extra $75 to $100 for the same model with hydraulic brakes, go ahead and get the hydraulic brakes. That's my firm advice. And I also always say don't diss the drum brakes, because in certain situations, drum brakes are good. They're also low maintenance. And the advantage to drum brakes, although they're cheaper and people consider them inferior, you are less likely to get sand or water or anything into them because they are enclosed. But it's old technology, so people aren't into that. So I asked on the forum, what is preferable, nut or Zoom? First response I got was Timotis said, I've used both on different scooters, and there really isn't much difference at all. Which, by the way, that's what Ginger on Wheels told me also in a side conversation. He goes on to say, I had the Zoom on a Chinese 60-volt scooter, and they did the job. The rear did develop a slight leak, which I fixed. I have the nut currently on my Weeped. That's a big, heavy-duty, fast, beastly scooter. And he says, while the brakes aren't bad, I have had to adjust them a few times due to rubbing. But for something like the Weeped, or he means basically a massive beast scooter, the Magura, M-A-G-U-R-A, Magura MT standard is the way to go without a doubt. And again, Ginger on Wheels kind of told me that same thing. All in all, both Zoom and Nut do the job, but compared to Magura, they are both well priced for what they do. So spend more money if you want the best and get Magura. I almost want to say Magura, because maguro in Japanese is tuna belly, right? Delicious sushi. Oishii no sushi da yo ne. Next, Dr. Scoot Little, who it turns out is none other than Paul Somerville from the Electric Scooter Guide, but on the forum he calls him Dr. Scoot Little. He says, Nut seems to have a slight edge. I've had one Zoom master cylinder fail. So the lever would slowly keep going after the brakes were applied. I bled it literally 6 times and had the same result. I installed a replacement master cylinder and it was instantly fixed. Nut also has the advantage of a lower profile master cylinder, which allows the throttle to be set closer to the brakes if you want to. So on your handlebars, what I believe he's saying is you have a little more room there, which real estate on handlebars is precious if you're going to add a little ding ding bell or a light, things like that. So between the two, Paul Somerville of the Electric Scooter Guide, whose opinion I hold in really high regard, and you should too, because he tears these scooters apart and puts them back together. He says Nut has a slight edge. So for me, bottom line, it sounds like Magura is the way to go. If you got the simoleons, if you got the cash, if you got the moolah, fork it out, and you want to go that way. But between Nut and Zoom, it seems like Nut has the edge, according to Paul, who I believe, because I totally respect his opinion. And with that, wow, we're coming up on a half an hour. that will be the end of this episode of the Electric Scooter Podcast. As always, if you want to contact me, dagwoodstreets@gmail.com. I do send these podcast episodes to YouTube. There's nothing exciting. It's just the audio. I get virtually no looks. I mean, very few looks, but you could leave a comment there. I leave those up for a couple months because there are some people who prefer to listen on YouTube. It's weird. I have a nephew, and that's what the way he prefers to listen to podcasts in general is on YouTube. So I do post them on YouTube. You can leave a comment there. You can give me 5 stars at the bottom of iTunes, or what they're now calling the podcast, just podcast. Macintosh has gone that way. You know, they call their music app just music. I don't know how I feel about that. And then the podcast app is just called podcast. I don't know. It is what it is. So you can scroll all the way to the bottom, give me 5 stars for the Electric Scooter Podcast, and you can then post some criticism, or you can say what you like about it or what you'd like me to do. Or you can also go to the Dagwood Streets YouTube channel. I occasionally post travel scooting videos there, and I'll just put some music in the background as I'm scooting around a lake or an area that I think is interesting. And you can leave comments for the podcast there also. So there's 3 ways for you to have input into this Electric Scooter Podcast, your Electric Scooter Podcast from the Scooter Dome in Las Vegas. So with that, scooterheads, please, until next time, keep the shiny side up and the dirty side down.